My brother sat me at the back table of his engagement dinner. He introduced me to the room as an old family friend. Not his sister. An old family friend. He said his fiancée's father was an important man and the last thing he needed was his night shift nurse sister, making the family look small. I did not argue. I never did. I sat at the back table with my hands in my lap, and I watched my brother perform for a room full of people who did not know I existed. And sometime after the toast, the most important man in that room looked across the hall and saw me for who I was before anyone in my own family ever had. My name is Willa. I work the night shift in a neonatal transport unit. That means when a baby is born too early, too small, too sick for the hospital they are in, I am the one who moves them. Helicopters, ambulances, incubators that weigh more than the children inside them. I hold them for the entire ride. I monitor every breath. I keep them warm and alive while the sky is dark, and the parents are somewhere behind us, praying into a phone they cannot stop checking. Most people do not know this job exists. Most people hear nurse and picture a woman with a clipboard and a calm voice. They do not picture the woman in the helicopter at 3 a.m. holding a baby that weighs less than a bag of sugar and making decisions that will determine whether that child sees sunrise. That is my life. Every night I hold someone else's baby, and every morning I come home to a family that has never once asked me about it. My brother Grant is older than me. He is the kind of man who walks into a room and checks whether the room is watching. He builds his life around visibility, the right job title. Our parents Pauline and Douglas built their pride around him the way you build a shelf around a trophy. Everything angled toward making Grant look good. I was the other shelf, the one in the back of the closet. Not broken, just unlit. Pauline never said she was disappointed in me. She said things like, "Nursing is noble work," with a voice that made noble sound like a consolation prize. Douglas never said anything at all. His silence was consistent. He showed up for Grant's milestones and forgot mine with the same quiet reliability. I was used to it. Being overlooked had stopped feeling like rejection and started feeling like weather. I still showed up. I still called. I still drove home for holidays and sat in the background while Grant narrated his latest achievement, and my parents leaned in like they were watching their favorite show. Grant knew I worked nights with sick babies. That was the beginning and end of what he knew, because he had never once cared enough to ask for more. But this dinner was different. Grant was engaged to a woman named Cecily, smart and warm, the kind of person who looked you in the eye when she talked to you. I liked her immediately. And more importantly, her father was Arthur. I should pause here. Arthur had spent over 20 years anchoring national news coverage. Elections, crises, the moments when people stop what they are doing and look at a screen. His was the face they looked at. What fewer people knew was that years earlier, his oldest son's baby had been born in crisis. The baby survived, and after that, Arthur had quietly become involved in neonatal care advocacy and hospital funding. People in that world knew his name for reasons that had nothing to do with the news. Grant had been building toward this dinner for months. The venue. The guest list. He treated it like a campaign, not a celebration. Everything had to be controlled. Everything had to project the right image. And in Grant's image, I was a smudge he needed to keep out of frame. He called me 2 weeks before the dinner. He said, "I want you to come but keep a low profile. Sit at the table I assign you. Do not talk about your job unless someone asks. And if they ask, just say you work in healthcare. Do not say nurse." Then he said one more thing. He said, "If anyone asks who you are, I will introduce you as an old family friend. Not my sister. Just an old family friend." I was quiet for a long time. He was not just putting me in the back of the room, he was taking my name off the guest list of his own family. I said okay. Because I always said okay. The dinner was at a private restaurant outside the city. Long tables. White linens. The kind of room that whispered money without saying the word. On the way to my seat, Grant walked me past a few guests. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "This is Willa, an old friend of the family." He said it twice. Casual, smooth. Like he had practiced the sentence. I smiled and nodded and felt my own name dissolve in the air between us. Back table. Near the kitchen entrance. I could see Grant at the head table with Cecily and their parents. Laughing. Glowing. The family portrait was complete without me in it. Not as his sister. not as anything real, just a family friend at the back table, who nobody needed to think about twice. I sat there and I thought about the night before. I had been in a helicopter over the mountains, holding a baby girl who was barely breathing. 2 pounds. Born at 26 weeks. The parents were driving behind us on the highway because there was no room in the aircraft. I held that baby for the entire flight. I sang to her. Not because singing helps medically. Because the silence in a helicopter at night when a baby is struggling is the kind of silence that feels like it is swallowing you. So I sang. And she made it. I came home at 6 in the morning. I slept for 4 hours. I put on a dress and drove to my brother's dinner, where I was told to sit in the back and not mention what I do. That is my life. I hold other people's children through the worst night of their lives, and then I go sit at a table where my own family does not want anyone to know my name. The dinner moved the way Grant had choreographed it. Courses came and went. Toasts were planned. Grant stood and spoke about Cecily with the precision of a man who had practiced every word. Pauline dabbed her eyes. Douglas raised his glass. The room applauded. Then Arthur arrived. He had been delayed. The room shifted when he walked in. Heads turned. People straightened. He greeted Cecily first. He shook Grant's hand. He sat down. I watched from the back. The face I had seen on television 100 times. Calm. Steady. The kind of face that made you feel like someone competent was in the room. He scanned the tables casually, the way you scan a room when you are used to being watched and want to know who is watching back. His eyes moved across the guests, past the candles, past the linens, past the waiters, and then they stopped. On me. There are faces attached to the worst night of your life that do not leave you. Not because you saw them for long, because you saw them when losing everything felt possible. I understood that look the second it landed on me. He had seen me twice that night. Once on the helipad when I carried his grandson off the aircraft, and once outside the NICU doors at dawn when I told him his grandson had made it. He was looking directly at me. From across the room, his expression shifted, not confusion, recognition. The slow, heavy recognition of a man who has just seen a face he was not expecting to see in this room, but knows exactly where he has seen it before. He said something to Cecily. She turned and looked in my direction. He stood up from the head table, and he started walking toward me. Grant saw it happen. I watched his face drain. The color left his cheeks the way water leaves a glass when you tip it. He stood up half a second later and started moving, but Arthur was already halfway across the room. Every step deliberate. Every eye in the restaurant following him. Because when the most recognizable man in the room stands up and walks toward the back table, people notice. I did not move. I did not breathe. I just sat there with my hands folded in my lap, watching the most important moment of my brother's dinner walk away from his table and toward mine. Arthur stopped in front of my table. He did not sit down. He stood there looking at me the way people look at something they thought they had lost and just found in a place they were not expecting. His face was doing something I had seen before, not on television, in hospitals, in hallways outside the NICU. The face of someone who is remembering the worst night of their life, and the person who got them through it. He said, "I didn't know you were here. Why are you sitting back here?" I did not respond, not because I was being difficult, because my throat had closed. The man whose face I had seen on my television screen for 20 years was standing in front of me at my brother's engagement dinner, and he was looking at me like I was the most important person in the room. Grant appeared behind him, moving fast. His hand reached for Arthur's shoulder but stopped halfway. He did not have the courage to touch the most powerful man in the room while that man was staring at his sister. Arthur did not turn around. He kept his eyes on me. Then he reached into his jacket. He pulled out his wallet. Not quickly, slowly. The way a man handles something sacred, he opened it. Between the cards and the leather folds, there was something that did not belong in a wallet. A small knitted bracelet. Faded. The yarn was thin and soft, and the color had washed out to something between lavender and gray. He held it between his thumb and forefinger and turned it so I could see the inside. My handwriting. Small and uneven. Written with a marker that was running out of ink on a night I barely remembered and would never forget. 2 words. You made it. I stopped breathing. I stared at that bracelet and the room around me disappeared. I was back in the helicopter. The incubator light casting a blue glow on a baby so small that my hand covered his entire back. I remembered writing those words before we landed. I tied the bracelet to his wrist while the medical team was preparing to receive him. It was something I did for every baby I transported. A small ritual, a thread between the flight and the life that came after. I did not know anyone kept them. I did not know this man carried one in his wallet. Arthur held the bracelet toward me. His voice changed. Lower, the professional anchor voice was gone. What came out was the voice of a grandfather. He said my grandson was born weighing less than 2 pounds. His condition was critical. The hospital he was born in could not help him. They called for a helicopter transport to a facility that could. The doctors told us he might not survive the flight. He was too small. Too fragile. The odds were not in his favor. He paused. The restaurant was silent. Every table had stopped. Every fork was down. Every conversation had ended. The only sound was Arthur's voice and the faint hum of the kitchen behind me. He said this woman was on that helicopter. She held my grandson the entire way. She held him, and she kept him alive until they reached the hospital. He put the bracelet down on the table in front of me. Then he reached into his wallet again. This time he pulled out a photograph. Small, worn at the edges. A little boy, holding onto the edge of a couch with both hands, 1 foot forward. The kind of photo you take the moment a child takes his first real step. He set the photograph next to the bracelet. He said, "This is him now. He just started walking. He runs everywhere. His mother cannot keep up with him. He laughs at everything. And he is alive. Because this woman did not let go in the air." I looked at the photograph. The boy had dark hair and round cheeks, and he was grinning at whoever was holding the camera. He looked like every healthy toddler I had ever seen. Strong. Loud. Unaware that he had once been small enough to fit in my hands. My eyes burned. I pressed my lips together and I held it. Because crying in a helicopter at 3 a.m. when a baby is struggling is one thing. Crying at your brother's engagement dinner because a stranger just showed you what your work became is something else entirely. Arthur straightened up. He turned to the room. He was no longer speaking to me, he was speaking to everyone. He said I was going to stand here tonight and toast my daughter's future. I still will. But first, I need to honor the woman who gave my family a future. Because without her, my grandson would not be taking those steps. And this woman is sitting at the back of this room like she does not belong here. I need someone to explain that to me. The room was frozen. Every pair of eyes shifting between Arthur and me, and the back table near the kitchen entrance where my brother had placed me so I would not embarrass him. Grant was standing 3 feet behind Arthur. His face was gray. Not embarrassed gray, exposed gray. The gray of a man whose stage has just been taken by someone with more authority than he will ever have. Cecily stood up from the head table. She walked toward us. She looked at me. Then at Grant. Then at Arthur. She said, "Who is this woman?" Arthur looked at Grant. The look was not hostile, it was worse. It was patient. The kind of patience that says, "I already know the answer. I am giving you one chance to say it yourself." Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His jaw moved, but the words would not form. The man who had spent months choreographing this dinner could not produce a single honest sentence when it mattered. Someone at a nearby table said it for him. Quiet, but clear. "She is his sister." The room shifted. Cecily's face went through something I will never forget. She looked at Grant the way people look at a building after realizing the front is only paint. Then she said, "His sister." Her voice dropped. She said, "You told me she was an old family friend. She is your sister, and you erased that." Grant started talking. He said he was trying to keep the evening focused. He said he did not want distractions, each excuse thinner than the last. Cecily cut him off. She said, "You did not just hide her, you renamed her at your own table." Then she looked at Grant and said something the room would not forget. She said she held my family's miracle for hours in a helicopter, and you could not even hold your sister's name for one dinner. The room did not recover from that sentence. I do not think Grant did either. Arthur turned back to me. His voice was warm now. Not the anchor voice, not the grandfather voice. Something simpler. He said, "You are welcome at my table any time." He said it the way you say something you mean permanently. I nodded. I did not speak. I had not said a single word since Arthur walked over. Not because I had nothing to say, because the room was saying it for me. Every face, every silence, every pair of eyes moving between the back table and the man who put me there. My silence was louder than anything I could have said. Cecily walked away from Grant. She did not go back to the head table. She pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat down next to me. At the back, near the kitchen entrance. She did not say anything. She just sat. I looked at the bracelet on the table, the photograph beside it, a little boy learning to walk, a piece of yarn with my handwriting on it. Two objects that told a story no one at this dinner knew until 5 minutes ago. And across the room, standing exactly where Arthur had left him, was my brother. Alone. In the middle of his own engagement dinner. Surrounded by people who were no longer looking at him the way he needed them to. I looked at Cecily sitting next to me. I looked at Arthur standing tall. I looked at the photograph of a boy who was running now because I had held him when he could not breathe on his own. Every time Grant had said night shift nurse like it was a label you put on a jar to warn people not to open it. An old family friend, that is what he called his own sister. The woman who held his world together above the clouds, and tonight the whole room knew it. I drove home that night with the windows down. The air was cold and I needed to feel something that was not the inside of that restaurant. The bracelet was in my pocket. Arthur had pressed it into my hand before I left. He said, "Keep it." I said, "It is yours." He said, "It was always yours. You made it." I just carried it. I held it the whole drive. A piece of yarn with my handwriting on it, tied to a baby's wrist in a helicopter years ago, and carried in a man's wallet ever since. 2 words. You made it. I had written them hundreds of times for hundreds of babies, but this was the first time the words had come back to me. The days after the dinner were loud even though I was not part of them. Grant called 4 times. I did not answer. His voicemails were a man trying to rearrange furniture in a house that was already on fire. He said I overreacted. He said Arthur had misread the situation. He said the seating was not personal. Each message more desperate than the last. Each one further from the truth. Pauline called next. Her voice had the tone I knew well, the one that sounded like concern but functioned as management. She said I had embarrassed Grant at the most important dinner of his life. I said I sat at the back table and did not say a word. She said that was the problem. If I had just stayed invisible, none of this would have happened. I let that sentence land. Stayed invisible. My mother wanted me to be invisible so her son could be seen. That was not a new sentence. That was the family mission statement. She had just never said it out loud before. I said the person who embarrassed Grant was Grant. Then I hung up. I sat in my apartment that night, and I thought about what Grant had done. He had not just put me at the back table. He had introduced me as someone else, an old family friend. He had looked people in the eye and stripped the word sister out of me, like it was a stain he needed to remove before the important guests arrived. That was not embarrassment. That was erasure. And my parents had watched him do it and said nothing. Douglas called 2 days later. Short. Quiet. He said, I watched them put you at that table, and I did not say anything. I told him I knew. He said it was wrong. I said it has been wrong for a long time. He was quiet for a while. Then he said I should have stood up. I said yes, you should have. But you did not. And I survived anyway. He did not argue. He did not make excuses. He just said okay. And that was the most honest word my father had ever given me. Cecily ended the engagement within the week. She did not make a public statement. She did not need to. The room had seen everything. Grant's face. The back table. Arthur standing over his sister, while his future son-in-law stood frozen behind him. The story told itself. But the engagement was not the only thing Grant lost. Grant had spent years building a career, reinforced by borrowed credibility. Being close to Arthur's family had opened doors and made people assume he belonged in rooms he had not fully earned on his own. No one needed Arthur to punish him. The real damage came when people suddenly saw Grant clearly. The invitations slowed. The warmth cooled. His firm stopped treating him like a rising star. His role was reduced. Key clients were reassigned. Within months, he was doing the work of someone half his title, not because one dinner ruined him, but because one dinner revealed how much of his image had been supported by other people's names. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel revenge. I felt the quiet clarity of watching something collapse that was never built on anything solid. Grant's life had been a stage set, lights and angles and the right people in the right chairs. But stage sets fall when someone turns on the house lights, and Arthur had turned them on. Arthur called me the following month, not a social call, a professional one. Through his advocacy work, he had remained closely involved with the hospital where his grandson had been treated, and they were expanding their NICU transport program. A board was being formed to help guide the expansion. He said he had recommended me, not as a symbol, not as a thank you, as someone whose judgment had been earned in the air, in the dark, over years no one had bothered to count. He said, "You have been carrying babies through the air for years. It is time someone put you in a room where you can shape how it is done for everyone." I sat on my apartment floor with the phone against my ear and I cried. Not the hospital kind of crying where you hold it in because someone's life depends on your steadiness, the other kind. The kind that comes when someone sees the thing you have been doing in silence and says it out loud. I said yes. The board met monthly. I was the only person at that table who had held a 2-pound baby in a helicopter. Every time someone proposed a protocol, I could feel the weight of every transport I had ever done pressing behind my words. I was not speaking from theory. I was speaking from 3 a.m. My life changed slowly after that. I still worked nights. I still transported babies. I still tied bracelets to tiny wrists and wrote "You made it" in marker that was always running low. But now the work had a second layer. I was not just doing it. I was building the system that supported everyone who did it. Pauline softened over time. Not a transformation. A thaw. She stopped saying I had embarrassed the family. Once she said I saw an article about the transport program. Your name was in it. She did not say she was proud, but she said my name out loud. And from Pauline, that was a lot. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Brown box. Taped shut. I opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside were photographs, old ones, the kind with white borders and faded color. Birthdays, holidays, school events, family dinners. I spread them out across the counter and I looked at them one by one. In every single photograph, I was in the background, standing behind Grant, sitting at the edge of the frame, half visible in the corner while the camera focused on someone else. There was not a single photo where I was in the center. Not one. At the bottom of the box was a note. Grant's handwriting. He had written one sentence. "You were always in the back of the frame." I never noticed until I looked. I stared at that note for a long time. It was not an apology. It was not enough. But it was the first time my brother had looked at a photograph of our family and seen what was missing. The back of the frame, the back of the table. An old family friend. That is where he had kept me. And it took losing everything for him to look at those photos and realize the person he had been cropping out was the one who should have been in the center. I did not call him. I did not write back. Some sentences need to sit with the person who wrote them before they are ready to become a conversation. That note was Grant's weight now, not mine. But I kept one photograph. The one where I was barely visible behind Grant at a birthday party. I put it on my shelf next to the bracelet. 2 objects. One from a man who saw my value from the beginning. One from a man who finally saw it from the edge of everything he lost. I still work nights. I still hold babies who are too small and too early and too fragile for the world they just entered. I still write you made it on bracelets that some families tuck into drawers, some lose in the chaos of going home, and a few carry in their wallets for the rest of their lives. I do not know which ones will keep them. That is not my job. My job is to write the words and tie the knot and hold on until we land. Before you go, tell me your city and the time where you are right now. I read your comments every day, and little by little, this is becoming the kind of community where nobody has to sit at the back table alone. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and be part of that with us. I'll see you in the next one.